I pretended to be confused, hands trembling as I reached for the pen to sign away my will, right in front of my smiling adopted son, waiting for me to give up everything. But then the doctor stood, slammed the table, and shouted, "They're poisoning her!" Police stormed in, and I just watched them get handcuffed. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now to catch more shocking episodes like this one. Under the burnished amber canopy of Aspen Ridge, the Sullivan estate stood silent, solemn, even like a woman mourning her own memories. Autumn had come with a softness that almost made the house look warm again. Golden leaves drifted lazily to the ground, swirling on the stone steps like forgotten letters. But inside the grand ivy-draped mansion at the edge of town, a colder stillness lingered. Martha Sullivan moved slowly through the drawing room, her hand trailing the carved edge of a mahogany bookshelf older than most marriages. Her steps were measured, the shuffle of woolen slippers brushing the oriental rug in a rhythm only she knew. She didn't rush anymore. There was no need. The clocks in this house ticked for no one but her. She sat by the window where the sunlight used to dance on her husband's silver hair. The leather of the armchair creaked beneath her as she settled in with a sigh. Her fingers, knotted with time, gripped a letter, the kind printed on crisp paper with formal headers. It bore the signature of Harrison and Blake, the family's long-standing legal firm. Her eyes skimmed the words for the third time that morning. "Dear Mrs. Sullivan, we kindly remind you that the revised will dated March 2nd remains unsigned." She pressed the page flat on her lap, fingers twitching. Something in her gut pulled tight, a tension born not of age, but of instinct. The revised will. A necessary thing, surely. After all, Zachary was her only family left. The papers had sat on her desk for weeks. Still, something in her bones told her now wasn't the time to sign. Not yet. Martha leaned back, letting her gaze fall on the hearth. The fire hadn't been lit in months, but she could still see him, Henry, sitting there polishing his cufflinks, chuckling at his own terrible jokes. She didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But the house was full of them. Footsteps in empty rooms, a laugh echoing in the kitchen. Her own reflection looking back a little too knowingly from the mirror. She closed her eyes and exhaled. And then the doorbell rang. Not once, twice, 3 times. Urgent. She opened her eyes slowly. The bell's tone hadn't changed in decades, but somehow today it felt intrusive. Her eyes drifted to the mantel clock. Visitors weren't common, especially not unannounced. She rose, smoothing her cardigan, and crossed the foyer with steady grace. The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges as she opened it, and there on the porch stood 2 figures, Zachary and Amber. He smiled wide, his teeth bright as frost in the morning sun. He looked the same, and yet not. Hair too styled, skin too smooth. Behind him, Amber stood like a magazine ad come to life. Perfect posture, a silk scarf knotted at her neck. Lips painted the kind of red that always seemed to stain. Mama Zachary's voice rang out like an old radio station trying too hard to sound familiar. Martha blinked heart still as the air between them. "Well," she said slowly, "this is unexpected." Zachary stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her, his coat brushing her cheek with a scent of foreign cologne and ambition. She didn't hug him back, not right away. Amber leaned in and kissed the air beside Martha's cheek. "We were in the area. Thought we'd surprise you." Martha pulled back, studied their faces. Zachary's eyes darted sideways as he adjusted the duffel bag on his shoulder. Amber's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Surprise me, you did," Martha murmured, stepping aside. "Come in before the wind carries you off." Inside the mansion seemed to recoil from their presence like a cat lifting its back. The air thickened. Martha watched as Zachary glanced around the foyer like an appraiser more than a son. Amber's heels clicked on the hardwood as she made her way to the sitting room, admiring framed photographs. "Still the same," she said, tracing a finger along a photo of Henry in uniform. "So much history. So much dust," more like Zachary added with a forced chuckle. Martha followed behind them slowly, her mind, sharpened eyes missing nothing. the slight smirk Amber gave Zachary when they thought she wasn't looking, the over-eagerness in their voices, the way their gazes lingered not on her, but on the furnishings, the windows, the structure. They weren't here for tea. She poured it anyway. Zachary sat legs crossed, arms wide on the velvet couch like he already owned the place. "I've been thinking about you, Ma," he said after a sip. "We've been worried." Martha raised a brow. "Have you?" Amber leaned forward, laying a perfectly manicured hand on Martha's knee. "You're getting older. This house is so big. It's too much for one person." Martha tilted her head. "You're not wrong. We just want what's best," Zachary added quickly. "Maybe it's time to think about the future, about responsibility." That word hung in the air like the smell of bleach, clean, sterile, and threatening. Martha smiled thinly. "That's kind of you, Zachary, but I think about the future all the time." He glanced at Amber. She nodded subtly. "We were talking," Amber said, her voice silky as candle wax, "and maybe we could stay for a bit. Help you out. You know, just until things are settled." "Settled," Martha echoed. She took another sip of tea, pretending not to notice the sharp sweetness clinging to the edge of her cup. "Are things unsettled?" Amber laughed. "No, of course not. Just, it's good to be close. Family is everything." Zachary leaned forward, tapping his fingers against his knee. "We're not here to push anything, Mom. Just thought we could spend time with you. Maybe help sort out some paperwork." Martha met his gaze. His pupils didn't dilate. His hands were too steady. He was prepared for this. "I see," she said softly. She let the words hang. Zachary smiled again, rehearsed too quick. "There's no rush. We're here for you." For a moment no one spoke. Then Martha slowly stood. "I suppose a few days won't hurt. The guest room is made up." Amber beamed, rising. "Thank you, Helen. This means a lot." Martha's lips curved faintly, a shadow of a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm sure it does," she said. She turned away then, moving toward the hallway, her shadow stretching long behind her across the floorboards. In the dining room mirror she caught her own reflection. The glint in her eye was sharper now. The storm had not come yet, but the pressure was rising, and the wind had shifted. The Sullivan house would not stay silent for long. The kitchen still smelled like cinnamon toast from earlier that morning, but now Amber had filled it with a different aroma, herbal, floral, and almost too fragrant. She moved like she belonged there, her silk blouse perfectly tucked, her sleeves rolled back with delicate purpose. The porcelain teapot clinked softly against the counter as she poured boiling water over a sachet of dried petals and spices. "Chamomile and valerian root," she said sweetly without turning around. "Good for sleep." Martha stood at the threshold, watching the steam curl upward. Her nostrils flared subtly. The scent was familiar but heavier than chamomile. Too sweet, too thick. A note of licorice. Something else. Something bitter just beneath the floral. She didn't answer. Amber turned with a polished smile, holding 2 mugs with lemon slices floating like lazy buoys on the surface. "I thought we could wind down together, like old times." "We've never done this before," Martha replied, her tone pleasant, almost amused. Amber's laugh was a bit too loud. "Well, it's never too late to start right." Martha accepted the cup but didn't sip. Her fingers wrapped around the warm porcelain as she followed Amber into the sitting room. Zachary was already there, lounging like a prince across the arm of the couch, one leg over the other, sipping something amber in a crystal glass. "There's my girl," he said as she entered, nodding at the untouched mug in her hand. "You look tired." "I'm old," she replied without warmth. "It's what we do." Amber sat beside him, adjusting her skirt as if posing for a photograph. Martha eased into her chair, setting the mug down on the side table beside her. The steam continued to rise, so did her suspicion. Zachary took a long sip of his drink. "You know, I've been thinking about everything. The house, the estate. What happens next?" "Next," Martha echoed. "When the time comes," he said, softening his voice. "You always said you wanted things clean, legal, no confusion. It's probably smart to finalize the paperwork soon." "The paperwork?" she asked, already knowing. "The will," Amber interjected gently. "The one Harrison and Blake sent you." "I haven't signed it," Martha said plainly. Zachary leaned forward. "I know. That's why we're here, to help." Martha blinked slowly, then looked away as if distracted by the wind brushing against the window panes. But her mind was sharp. Every word they said, every shift in posture, every sip of that tea, they weren't helping. They were circling. Of course, she said, help is always thoughtful. Amber stood again too quickly, as if movement might mask intent. She busied herself by fluffing pillows, adjusting the curtains. The whole room looked suddenly staged, as though they'd been practicing their lines. You should get some rest, she said over her shoulder. That tea will help. I'm sure it will, Martha murmured, eyeing the cup. Later that night, long after they'd retired to the guest room, Martha stood barefoot in the hallway, robe wrapped tight around her. The mug remained untouched on her nightstand. She hadn't slept. She didn't plan to. She moved like a ghost down the stairs, candle in hand, flickering light casting shadows on the floral wallpaper. In the sitting room, she paused at the mantel. Something gleamed faintly, a sliver of metal just beneath the base of the old porcelain clock. She stepped closer. It was a lens, small, round, blinking faint red. Her heart didn't race. It didn't have to. She had known before the tea, before the questions about the will, before the overly warm embraces. This only confirmed what her gut had whispered since the moment they stepped through the door. She turned away slowly, eyes traveling across the room. Where else? Where would they hide the others? By morning, she found two more, one behind a loose panel in the hallway, another disguised as a button in the guest towel rack. They were good, but not good enough. Not for someone like her. The next day arrived with sun-false warmth coating the morning. Martha sat in the breakfast nook pretending to be engrossed in the newspaper, while Zachary rattled on about modern probate laws over his eggs. You know, he said between chews, it's actually more complicated now. Even with a will, if things aren't notarized, we might face delays. Probate court can be a nightmare. Nightmare, Amber echoed, pouring orange juice. And we just want to make sure everything's as easy for you as possible. How selfless, Martha murmured behind the edge of her paper. Zachary laughed. I'm serious. It's about protecting the legacy. You built this, Ma, all of it. Don't you want it to go to the right hands? The right hands, she said, softly lowering the newspaper. And whose hands would those be? Amber froze pitcher hovering just above Martha's glass. Zachary smiled tightly. Well, we're your family. Who else? Martha didn't answer. She simply looked out the window, watching the trees bend slightly in the wind. There was a camera in the hallway, another in the kitchen, possibly more she hadn't found yet. They were watching her, but what they didn't realize was that she was watching them back. That night, she didn't go to bed when the lights went out. She waited. In the darkness, she moved through the house like a woman counting her steps in a haunted memory. In the master bedroom, the one they insisted she keep using, even as they offered to move her into something more manageable, she inspected the molding around the dresser. There behind the mirror, another pinhole lens. They wanted her to fall apart. They wanted proof. They wanted to call the attorneys and say she'd lost her mind. She turned to the mirror. For a long moment, she stared at her own reflection. The fine lines, the tired eyes, the hair that refused to stay pinned, but the fire in her stare, that was as sharp as it had ever been. She didn't need to fight. Not yet. She needed to let them believe they were winning. So the next morning she left the tea untouched, but thanked Amber profusely for her kindness. When Zachary mentioned the will again, offering to help set an appointment, she nodded distractedly and asked him to pick up flour from the store. At dinner, she asked what kind of flowers Amber liked. She complimented Zachary's tie. She smiled a lot. And she let herself forget things. Did I feed the dog? She asked during dessert. You haven't had a dog in years, Amber replied too quickly. Oh, Martha blinked. Right, silly me. She left lights on in rooms she didn't use, misplaced her keys deliberately, called Zachary by her late husband's name once and let the awkward silence linger. Their excitement grew. Zachary whispered to Amber that night in the hallway. They didn't realize she was standing behind the stairwell listening. She caught words like getting closer and just a bit longer, and still she said nothing. Later that night, in the quiet hum of her room, Martha opened the bottom drawer of her nightstand. Beneath a stack of yellowing letters and pressed lilacs was an old spiral notebook. She opened it to a blank page. The handwriting that bloomed across it was slow but deliberate. Day 3. Suspect sedatives in tea. Detected increased licorice root smell. Zachary mentioned probate again. Amber continues performing caring role, insists on preparing meals. No direct threat. Emotional manipulation level increasing. She dated the page, signed it, closed the book. Behind the book, tucked in a carved wooden box, she retrieved a USB flash drive. She glanced once toward the mirror on the opposite wall. Let them watch. Let them gather their evidence. Because so was she. Because the house might be old. But the woman who lived in it, she was far from done. And she had just begun to remember exactly who she was. The morning began with a knock, not on the front door, but on the wall. Martha had slammed into it, loudly. She stood in the hallway robe, askew hair unbrushed, blinking like a woman lost in her own home. Is this the bathroom? She asked the wallpaper, dazed and breathless. Zachary, halfway down the stairs, paused. Ma, he called out, voice sharp with feigned concern. You okay? Martha turned, her expression vague. I was looking for Henry. He wanted tea. Henry's been gone for 7 years, Zachary replied, taking 2 steps closer. Has he? She said, blinking again. That doesn't sound right. It was all wrong, perfectly wrong. Amber rushed in, eyes wide with manufactured panic. Oh my God, she's confused again. Martha swayed slightly, one hand on the wall, eyes glassy. She whispered something incoherent and wandered toward the kitchen, passing the hallway mirror. She didn't look into it. She didn't need to. The performance was on point. Behind her, Amber's voice dropped to a whisper. We have to do something. Zachary didn't answer right away. His gaze followed Martha down the hallway like a predator waiting for weakness to become permanent. That afternoon, Martha misplaced her keys in the freezer. The next morning, she poured orange juice into her cereal and asked Amber what time church started, though it was Tuesday. By the 3rd day, Zachary couldn't hide his excitement. I called someone, he said that evening, eyes lit with purpose. A professional, just to check in. Martha was quiet, sitting in her chair with a throw blanket draped over her lap, one slipper missing. She nodded slowly. That sounds like a good idea. I think I need something. Amber looked delighted. You're doing the right thing. Zachary sipped his drink. Just an evaluation, nothing invasive. Oh no, of course not, Martha murmured. I trust you. The following afternoon, the front doorbell rang once. No frenzy, no drama, just a clear, confident tone. Amber answered it, smoothing her blouse as she opened the door. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a long, dark coat and charcoal slacks. His gray hair was trimmed neat, his wire-rimmed glasses perched low on a nose that had broken once, maybe twice, but healed proud. A leather satchel hung from his shoulder. Dr. Bernard Stone, he introduced himself, extending a hand. Amber shook it lightly, eyes flicking from his ID badge to his tailored coat. Thank you for coming. It means a lot. Zachary appeared behind her. This is my mother, Martha Sullivan. Bernard turned toward the sitting room, and there she was. Martha sat straight-backed in her chair, the picture of polite confusion. A knitted shawl draped around her shoulders, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes met his, and the moment stopped. Something moved behind Bernard's gaze. Recognition. Deep. Quiet. Martha's mouth twitched, not a smile, not quite, but the slightest twitch of one corner. Bernard blinked once, then offered her the gentlest nod. Mrs. Sullivan, he said softly. May I sit with you? Martha tilted her head. Do I know you? Amber hovered nearby, arms crossed. She's been like this all week. Bernard nodded, gesturing toward Zachary and Amber. Would you mind giving us the room? I find these sessions are best done privately. Amber hesitated. I think it's important I assure you your presence would only distract her, Bernard interrupted kindly but firmly. Zachary didn't argue. Come on, he said, tugging Amber's elbow. Let him work. They disappeared down the hall. The moment the hallway silence settled, Bernard turned back to Martha. Her posture relaxed, her lips parted. I thought I recognized that crooked nose, she said. Bernard's smile was slow, cautious. And I thought I'd buried that nickname. Bernard the Barricade. She whispered, voice low and amused. Still standing. And you, he said, sitting across from her. Still dangerous. Martha's eyes narrowed affectionately. You look tired. I am. I thought you died. She chuckled softly. Not yet, but someone's trying to help. He leaned forward. Voice a whisper, Zachary. She nodded once, and his wife. Bernard exhaled. I read your name and nearly canceled, but something told me not to. Your instincts always were better than your briefs. He laughed. She didn't. Martha, he said quietly, how bad is it? They're drugging the tea, she replied. There are cameras in the baseboards, and I'm almost certain they're preparing a legal strategy to declare me incompetent so they can seize the estate. Bernard sat back stunned. That's not just elder manipulation, that's criminal conspiracy. Wouldn't be the first time a Sullivan was betrayed in this house. His expression darkened. Why haven't you reported it? I don't have proof, she said. Only instinct. I need their intent, their methods, and I need someone who can see it recorded and say it isn't madness. You need me to play along. I need you to bear witness. Bernard looked at her long and hard. Then he pulled a notepad from his satchel, flipped to a blank page, and started writing. When Amber peeked in 20 minutes later, Bernard was scribbling something furiously, while Martha stared off toward the window, eyes glazed and distant. She kept asking me about her husband, he said softly. Where he went, whether the war was over. Amber's shoulders softened. It's sad, isn't it? Bernard nodded. It is. Martha didn't blink. Not until Bernard stood to leave his notepad tucked away and shook her hand. As their hands met, Martha reached out and gripped his wrist tightly. Her eyes locked with his. She turned his palm toward her and took a pen from the pocket of her shawl. In a quick, tiny stroke, she scrawled 3 words onto the pale flesh of his hand. I am awake. Bernard's breath caught. Martha squeezed once, then let go. Her face in the presence of Amber and Zachary returned to its mask. Bernard turned to them. She needs close monitoring, maybe even a transition plan. Zachary nodded solemnly. That's what we thought. Amber smiled like she had just won something. Bernard shook both their hands. Keep her calm. No stress. No surprises. I'll return next week. As he stepped outside, the late autumn wind swept leaves across the porch. He looked down at the scrawl on his hand. I am awake. The trap door had opened, and Martha had just invited him in. The sound of victory, it turned out, was the clicking of keyboard keys. Amber sat at the dining table, her silk robe catching the morning light like a theater curtain. Her perfectly manicured fingers danced over her laptop as she uploaded the final set of documents, affidavits, appointment requests, and a motion filed discreetly with the Aspen Ridge County Court. Zachary leaned over her shoulder, sipping espresso. You sure you dotted all the I's? He asked. Amber's eyes flicked up with a knowing smirk. I don't have to do anything. She clicked the final button, Submit Guardianship Request, Martha C. Sullivan, due to demonstrated mental decline. Zachary whistled low. And just like that, we're almost there. Outside the door, Martha stood silently holding an empty tea tray. She hadn't meant to listen, but she had. Every word, every syllable. Her fingers tightened around the ceramic handle, but her face stayed placid when she entered. Oh, I didn't realize you were working, she said lightly. Amber snapped the laptop shut and smiled. Just organizing some of our files for you, Helen. You know, getting things tidy. How thoughtful, Martha replied. I've always liked tidy. She placed the tray on the counter and returned to her room. That night, under the cover of moonlight and closed doors, Martha took a small drive. Bernard was waiting at a church parking lot 3 blocks away, standing beneath a flickering lamppost with his hands in his coat pockets. He looked like a man holding too many secrets. Martha stepped out of the car and handed him a small tin. Peppermint cookies, he asked, smiling. Hidden USB, she replied, labeled as icing measurements. He raised a brow. Clever. Inside, you'll find 2 weeks' worth of video clips. Footage from the hallway kitchen my room. Conversations they thought were private. Discussions about medication, forged signatures, and that little celebratory chat about the guardianship motion they submitted today. Bernard's jaw tensed. They actually filed. This afternoon. And you're still smiling, he said. Because they don't know I've been watching the Watchers, she said calmly. And you haven't seen my finale. Bernard held the tin tightly. You're going to need a legal counterstrike, something admissible. I'll let you know when it's time to call the cavalry, she said. For now they think I'm docile, distracted, and exactly where they want me. She turned to walk back to the car. Be careful, he called after her. Martha paused. Her voice was soft. I'm not the one being hunted, Bernard. Not anymore. The next morning brought artificial sunshine and a false sense of celebration. Amber, in a peach-colored dress, floated through the kitchen humming show tunes as she laid out canapes and sparkling cider. She arranged flowers in antique vases and filled crystal bowls with sugared pecans. Everything about the house looked festive. Even the piano had a ribbon draped across it. What's all this? Martha asked, eyes wide with practiced wonder. A toast, Amber beamed. Just something small, to new beginnings. Zachary emerged from the study in a pressed blazer, whistling. Nothing big, Ma. Just a little thank you for trusting us, for letting us be here with you. Martha blinked slowly. Did I agree to something? Amber laughed, guiding her toward the parlor. You're funny today. They handed her a glass of cider and she clutched it with slightly trembling fingers. They didn't notice how her eyes scanned the room clockwise, methodical, counting exits, noting shadows. To family, Zachary said. To legacy, Amber added. To peace, Martha murmured. They clinked glasses. As they sipped, Martha made a point to giggle mid-sip and spill a few drops onto her blouse. Oh dear, she muttered. Clumsy me. Amber swooped in like a hawk. Let me help, come, let's change your top. Zachary winked over her shoulder. We'll take care of her, don't worry. They didn't notice the way Martha palmed the hidden recorder from her sleeve into the planter beside the mantel. It was running. Every word was recorded, every cheer, every smug whisper about almost being done. Later that day, Zachary received a call. Martha sat in the sunroom pretending to nod off as he paced the hallway just outside. Yes, Thursday. Yes, bring all the documents. No delays, he said in a low voice. She's ready. She barely remembers breakfast most days. Amber joined him mid-conversation. Make sure the notary brings everything. Originals, witnesses. Let's get this wrapped. Martha opened one eye slowly, closed it again. Thursday came with fog, the kind that settled low on the ground, creeping around the hedges like something ancient and watchful. It hugged the estate, casting it in a quiet gloom, as if the house itself knew what was coming. A black sedan pulled into the gravel driveway, crunching softly beneath the weight of legal formality. From the back stepped a man in a charcoal suit carrying a leather briefcase and an air of assurance. Mr. Lawrence Bell Zachary introduced with a grin. Our attorney, family friend. Lawrence nodded, shaking hands politely. Lovely home. I see why you're all so eager to protect it. Martha sat in the drawing room draped in a shawl, her eyes a little too wide, her fingers twisting the hem of her dress as if in mild confusion. Lawrence approached. Mrs. Sullivan, a pleasure. I've prepared the final draft of your will. We just need your signature and we'll be out of your hair. She blinked. You're the florist? Lawrence chuckled awkwardly. No, ma'am. Just the man here to help keep your legacy secure. Oh, how kind. He sat across from her, flipping open the leather binder. Amber hovered, smiling. We thought it'd be easier this way, no pressure. Zachary placed a pen beside the document. Just sign where he marks. We'll take care of the rest. Martha nodded slowly. It's hard to read without my glasses. Amber immediately retrieved them. Here you go, sweetheart. Martha slipped them on. Her hands trembled slightly, not with weakness but calculation. She turned each page, eyes scanning quickly. She paused at the inheritance clause where Zachary and Amber's names were listed as sole beneficiaries. Such lovely names, she murmured. Lawrence pointed. Just initial here and a full signature at the bottom. Martha stared at the final page. Her pen hovered. She looked up at Zachary. What's today? She asked. Thursday, he said. Know the date? He smiled indulgently. The 16th. She signed. They applauded gently like it was a wedding and she was the flower girl who hadn't tripped. Lawrence gathered the documents. We'll file this with the registrar tomorrow. You're in good hands. Martha smiled thinly. I'm sure I am. When they were gone, Lawrence and the notary vanishing back into the fog, Martha walked to the back veranda. Bernard was already waiting, leaning against the garden railing, flipping through a copy of the document he'd retrieved from the duplicate camera Martha had installed in the study. They think it's over, she said. He nodded. It's just beginning. I need the court filing date for the guardianship claim, she said. You'll have it by morning. And the voice logs, already in the prosecutor's hands. Martha exhaled. Then we wait. Bernard turned to her, his voice low. You sure you want to play it this long? Martha stared out across the fog-blanketed lawn. I've spent a lifetime being underestimated, Bernard. Let them keep doing it. It's the only advantage they've left me. Behind her, the Sullivan house sat calm. But the trap was nearly closed, and the masks, they were about to melt. The wind came in low that night, crawling along the walls like breath. The Sullivan estate slept under layers of silence, each room holding its own secrets, each shadow watching. But in the kitchen, a single lamp glowed above the stovetop, casting long, slanted bars of yellow light across the tile. The clock ticked past 1:03 a.m. Martha stood in her slippers, wrapped in a heavy robe, her hair pinned loosely, the silver strands catching the light like moonlit wire. She unlocked the back door slowly. Bernard stepped through without a word, his coat soaked in fog, eyes scanning the room with professional caution. "You weren't followed?" she asked. "I parked 3 blocks east," he replied, setting his satchel on the kitchen table. "No lights, no tail." Martha moved with purpose, crossing to the pantry. From behind a false panel near the spice rack, she retrieved a plastic sewing box. Inside was a pink crocheted pouch, wrapped tight with red thread. She placed it between them on the table. Bernard opened it gently and found the USB drive nestled inside, surrounded by old paper clips and 2 expired coupons. "This is it?" he asked. 14 days worth of footage, audio, the sedative schedule. Every time they mentioned guardianship wills and my episodes, I tagged and dated the files by room and hour. He nodded, pocketing the drive. "It'll hold up. I was a litigator for 37 years, Bernard. If this doesn't hold up, nothing will." He allowed a brief smile, then grew quiet again. "You've written your statement." Martha opened a thick, leather-bound journal, its spine cracked with age. The pages were covered in neat cursive. Dates, times, observations, phrases she had repeated to them to keep up the act. Ingredients she sniffed in her tea. The words Amber used when she thought the hallway camera was off. The time Zachary raised his voice and said, "She'll be easier to manage after a little push." Every detail was there, a logbook of betrayal dressed in silk and smiles. Bernard exhaled deeply. "You've built a war chest." "This isn't war," she said. "It's preservation." From the top drawer, she pulled a smaller envelope, plain unmarked. "And this?" he asked. "My original will, signed 10 years ago, notarized, stored at the bank and duplicated here. It names no heirs." Bernard's eyes narrowed. "Not even Zachary." "Especially not Zachary," she said. He looked at her across the table. "Why not burn it all down now?" Martha didn't blink. "Because tomorrow they'll bring new papers. They'll think they've won. And I want to see their faces when they realize they've built their future on dust." Silence settled between them like another coat of fog. Then Bernard nodded gently, folding the journal and sliding it into his satchel with the USB. He stood. "Call me when the signing is complete." She reached out and touched his wrist. "Thank you, Bernard." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She closed the door behind him and watched his silhouette disappear into the mist. Upstairs, the house creaked as if aware something had shifted in its foundation. Martha turned off the light and walked slowly down the hallway, past the framed wedding photo, the library, the locked drawer full of old letters and legal cases. In her bedroom, she sat down at her desk. The pen in her hand felt heavier tonight. She flipped to the last page of her hidden journal and began to write. Day 15. Amber served me chamomile again. Slightly stronger aroma, suspect increase in dosage. Zachary referred to me as inventory during a phone call. Did not realize guest bathroom mic was active. Bernard retrieved evidence. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. She paused. Then below it in smaller letters. It is easier to play the fool than to fight the obvious. They believe what they want. That is their mistake. Morning came with too much sunlight and too little warmth. Zachary was chipper over breakfast, humming a tune she didn't recognize. He poured her orange juice with a flourish and even buttered her toast for her. "You know, Ma," he said between bites, "I was thinking. We could just get it over with. The papers, the signature. You'll feel better when it's all official." Amber entered behind him, hair pulled into a flawless chignon, holding a clipboard with faux casualness. "It's just some quick initials, nothing you haven't seen already." Martha chewed slowly, then reached for her tea. She sniffed once faint notes of lemon and something else. She sipped lightly, keeping her eyes on Zachary. "You want to do it today?" she asked, voice distant. Zachary grinned. "Why wait? The lawyer's ready. The notary's ready. We've got everything lined up." Martha wiped her mouth with a cloth napkin. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" "Of course," he said. "I only want what's best for you." She turned to Amber. "And you want what's best for me, too." Amber smiled, soft as velvet, always. Martha stood slowly. Her hands trembled just enough. She looked at them both, then nodded once. Then tomorrow. First thing. Zachary blinked. Tomorrow. I want to wear my mother's necklace. It's in the vault. Needs cleaning. Sentimental, you know. Amber hesitated. Of course. Zachary's smile returned, but it didn't reach his eyes. Tomorrow works. Martha walked to the hallway and paused near the mirror. She turned slightly, watching them through the reflection. They were already exchanging looks, already planning the champagne. Behind her calm, Martha felt it settle, the end game approaching, a quiet thrum beneath her skin. She touched the frame of the mirror gently and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be the last day." Then turning toward the stairs, her voice barely audible, "But not the way they think." The Sullivan estate sat beneath a sky the color of steel. The wind was still. Even the birds in the maple trees had grown quiet, as if something ancient in the walls had told them to hush. Inside the mansion, every breath of the old house seemed to brace for the collision to come. In the drawing room, the long oak table was polished to a mirror finish. At its center lay the final draft of the will, pristine, ready legal. The ink shimmered faintly on the signature line, and beside it rested a Mont Blanc pen, glinting in the soft light of the chandelier. Martha sat at the head of the table, dressed in a simple blue blouse and gray slacks. Her silver hair was pinned back. She looked smaller somehow, folded into herself, her spine slightly curved, hands resting in her lap. Her expression was unreadable. Zachary stood to her right, hands clasped in front of him like a shepherd waiting for a lamb to stumble. Amber hovered behind him, her red heels perfectly aligned on the Turkish rug. Her lips wore a shade of confidence, dark and sharp. The lawyer, Lawrence Bell, sat across from Martha, nodding politely, flipping open his binder and adjusting his reading glasses. And then there was Bernard. He leaned against the fireplace mantel, silent, unreadable, his eyes not leaving Martha. "You ready, ma?" Zachary asked gently. Martha nodded. "I think so." Lawrence slid the final document across the table and pointed to the line. "We've included everything you requested. Distribution of the estate trust clauses, and the transfer of title to Mr. Zachary Sullivan upon your passing. If you just sign here and initial on the previous 2 pages. Amber took a small step forward, her breath caught in her throat. Martha reached out with one hand, her fingers curling around the weight of the pen. Her hand trembled. Everyone watched. She leaned over the paper. The tip of the pen met the page. And then, "Stop!" The word cracked through the room like a gunshot. Bernard's voice, raw, unfiltered, shook the chandelier and silenced every breath. Zachary turned stunned. "What the hell?" Bernard didn't move from the mantel. "Don't let her sign it. Don't you dare let her sign a lie." Lawrence blinked, frozen, halfway through an encouraging nod. Amber narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" Bernard pushed off from the fireplace, stepping forward, his voice now a thunderstorm. "I'm talking about 2 criminals. 2 frauds, 2 manipulators who have spent the last 3 weeks poisoning, coercing, and isolating this woman." Zachary's voice rose sharp. "This is insane." "Is it?" Bernard snarled, slamming a small portable speaker onto the table. "Then maybe you can explain this." He pressed play. A recording crackled to life, Zachary's voice distant but unmistakable. "She's falling for it. Every time she calls me Henry, we're 1 step closer to guardianship. 1 signature and it's done. She won't even know what she signed." Amber's voice followed. "Just keep upping the valerian. She sleeps deeper. That buys us time." Lawrence stood up so quickly his chair toppled. "What is this?" he demanded. Bernard didn't stop. From his coat he pulled out the thick leather journal, Martha's handwritten record, and slammed it on top of the will. 14 days of psychological abuse, altered beverages, surveillance without consent, and conversations like that recorded, time-stamped, admissible. Zachary took a step forward. "You've lost your damn mind." "No," Bernard growled. "I finally put the pieces together." He turned to Martha. She hadn't moved. She was still sitting, the pen loose in her hand, her face still, her eyes distant. Amber scoffed. "This is absurd. She's delusional. He's delusional." But then Martha stood up, slowly, deliberately. She placed the pen on the table and pushed the will aside. She looked at Zachary, and for the first time in weeks her voice was firm, unwavering. "You were such a beautiful boy when you were 12. Zachary's mouth twitched. "I remember the day we signed the adoption papers. You clung to my coat like I was the only stable thing in your world." "Ma!" His voice cracked. "You wanted love," she said softly. "But somewhere along the way you wanted more. And when love didn't buy you enough, you tried to steal it." Amber turned and headed for the door. "This is done." "No," Martha said. You are. 2 sheriff's deputies stepped into the room just as Amber touched the doorknob. The first one held up a warrant. The second had handcuffs. Zachary Sullivan and Amber Lee. Sullivan, the deputy, announced, "You're under arrest for attempted fraud, elder abuse, illegal surveillance, and unlawful confinement." Amber spun around. "You can't be serious." Zachary stepped back. "Wait, what the hell, wait?" Lawrence backed away from the scene, eyes wide, his career evaporating in slow motion. "You lied to us!" Amber screamed at Martha. "You played us." Martha didn't blink. She just stared at them, as if they were nothing, as if they'd always been nothing. Zachary lunged forward once, but the deputies grabbed him, shoved him against the wall, cuffed him. "You don't get to do this," he shouted. But Bernard's voice sliced through the noise like a judge delivering sentence. "She's the sanest person in this house," he said. "And you're just another con who picked the wrong damn widow." The room was filled with sounds, handcuffs snapping, heavy footsteps, the echo of shame. Amber screamed something unintelligible as they dragged her out, her voice disappearing down the hallway like smoke from a dying fire. Martha remained where she stood, still, quiet, alone. Bernard walked over and gently slid the will off the table. He folded it once, twice, then tossed it into the fireplace. "I hope you kept the original where I told you," he said. Martha nodded. "At the bank." He smiled faintly. "Smart woman." She turned toward him. The silence between them now wasn't strategy or secrecy. It was relief, a long-earned breath in a room finally clean of rot. And outside the wind finally stirred. The interrogation room was sterile gray walls, one overhead light, a battered metal table, and 2 chairs that had seen too many confessions. The silence was heavy, as if justice itself held its breath in anticipation. Martha sat with her hands folded on the table, perfectly composed, in her tailored navy coat and string of pearls. Her presence didn't match the cold surroundings. She looked like a woman who belonged in a courtroom gallery, not across from a man in handcuffs. Zachary slouched in the opposite chair, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, eyes bloodshot from shouting and sleeplessness. His blazer had been removed, his shirt collar wrinkled. Sweat slicked his hair back. But what made him look truly broken wasn't the handcuffs. It was that she wouldn't look at him. Not at first. The officer left the room and closed the door quietly behind them. Martha finally raised her eyes. Zachary's voice cracked first. "I didn't mean to hurt you." Martha didn't flinch. Zachary leaned forward. "I was desperate, okay? The bills, the house, everything was falling apart." She placed a manila envelope on the table between them and slid it forward. "What's this?" he asked. "Truth," she said. He opened it, hands shaking. Inside was a folded document, 2 pages stamped and certified. His eyes scanned the first lines, then locked on the bolded header. "Paternity test result. Zachary Sullivan." His breath caught. His fingers tightened on the page. He read the highlighted section. "Probability of biological relationship 0.0%. His lips moved, but no sound came. Martha's voice was calm but heavy. "You're not my son." Zachary looked up, stunned. What are you talking about?" "My husband found you," she said. "After the fire on Hollow Creek Road. You were 5, alone, no family. He brought you home, told me you were a miracle. I didn't ask questions. I just accepted you." He was shaking his head. No, that's not true. You're lying. This is a trick." Martha's eyes glistened, but her tone didn't waver. "I fed you, clothed you, sat by your hospital bed when you had bronchitis, took you to school every morning until you turned 13, and told me to stop holding your hand in public." "Stop," he growled. "I watched your first heartbreak. I defended you when you stole from that gas station, and I took the fall so you wouldn't have a record. I paid for college you never finished." His hands gripped the edge of the table, white-knuckled. "But I was never your mother, was I?" she whispered. Zachary's voice exploded, shattering what little composure he had left. "I called you Mom." "You called me what was convenient," she replied. Tears streamed down his face now. "You told me I was family." "And you were," she said, quieter now. "Until family meant inheritance, until love turned into leverage." He threw the papers across the table. "You were always distant, always holding back." "Because I knew," she said. "Deep down I always knew you weren't mine. But I loved you anyway. I made you mine." He stood up, dragging the chair behind him. "You can't erase what we had." "I'm not erasing it," she said, standing too. "You are. The door opened behind them. Amber entered with an officer escort. Her mascara had run down her cheeks. She looked 10 years older than she had hours ago. Her eyes darted between Martha and Zachary. "You lied to me," she said to him, voice shaking. "You said you were the only heir. You said your mother was half gone and rich, and that she trusted you." Zachary didn't answer. "She's not even your mother," Amber cried. Martha turned to her, voice cool and sharp. "He fed you a story, and you drank it like sweet wine." Amber turned to the officer. I didn't know any of it." Martha stepped back. "Ignorance isn't innocence." Zachary leaned over the table again. "You don't get to walk away from this." She studied him for a long moment. Then her voice dropped to a whisper that felt colder than a scream. "I was your mother, until the day you decided to murder me slowly." Zachary's face twisted in rage and desperation. "I needed help." "You needed control," she said. Martha turned away. Zachary lunged forward, but the handcuffs and the officer held him back. "Mom," he shouted, "please!" She didn't stop. She didn't flinch. She walked out the door with her back straight, and her steps deliberate, leaving him in that steel-gray room yelling into the void. And when the door closed behind her, Zachary collapsed into the chair, head in his hands, surrounded by the sound of a name he would never be allowed to say again. The Pacific murmured beneath a rising sun, each wave folding over the next like whispered secrets shared between tides. Venice Beach stretched wide and golden, the morning fog clinging to the horizon like a memory, not yet ready to let go. Martha stood on the wooden porch of a small coastal bungalow. It wasn't grand, no antique chandeliers, no spiral staircases, no oil paintings of forgotten relatives. Just driftwood siding, peeling turquoise shutters, and the salty scent of sea air curling through the cracks of weather-worn slats. It was nothing like Aspen Ridge, and that was exactly the point. She unlocked the front door with a brass key she'd been given the night before by a quiet, gray-eyed woman at the leasing office who didn't ask too many questions. Inside the home smelled of cedar and linen. Sunlight poured through the sheer curtains, landing in soft pools on the wood floor. There were no security cameras, no microphones, no glances from behind hallways. For the first time in years, no one was watching. She dropped her duffel onto the floral armchair and crossed to the window facing the ocean. It opened with a creak. The wind kissed her cheeks, tousling her silver hair. The salt stung her eyes, and she welcomed the sting. It felt like proof she was still real. Outside, gulls danced through the breeze. Down the sidewalk, a man in a denim jacket walked his dog, a golden retriever with a limp, and nodded as he passed. His gaze wasn't curious, just kind. A knock came from the side gate a moment later. Martha peeked out and found the same man from the sidewalk holding a small planter box filled with succulents. "Morning," he said. "Name's Charlie. I live next door." Martha stepped out slowly, the sun warming her arms. "You always bring plants to new neighbors, only the ones who look like they've seen some things." She smiled. "For real." Charlie handed her the box. "They're easy. Don't need much water, just sunlight and a little attention." "I can manage that." "Bet you can," he said. "Welcome to Venice." He left without lingering, without questions, just a wave and a gentle nod. Martha took the planter into the kitchen and placed it on the sill where the morning sun was now streaming in freely. She touched one of the little aloe shoots with the tip of her finger. It bent slightly as if in greeting. She exhaled. It wasn't Aspen Ridge, but her breath finally reached the bottom of her lungs here. She made tea chamomile, but this time untainted by hidden pills or glances over the rim of a cup. She selected a porcelain mug with a faded blue stripe and poured the steaming liquid herself, watching the way the heat spiraled upward like incense from an altar. When she sat at the small table by the window, she caught her reflection in the glass. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look tired. She looked like a woman who had just at long last returned to her own name. Outside, Charlie played jazz from a radio on his deck. The notes drifted through the air and into her kitchen as if summoned by need. She laughed, not softly, not politely, but wholly. That afternoon, Martha visited a local nursery. She walked slowly through the rows of terracotta pots, brushing her fingers across rosemary bushes, lavender blooms, and tiny climbing vines that looked like stories waiting to happen. She bought 4 planters, 3 seed packets, and a pair of gloves she didn't need but liked the color of. She walked home. No one followed. She dug her hands into soil with the confidence of a woman who'd earned her dirt. She planted slowly mint first, then jasmine, then the sunflowers she'd always wanted to grow but never had a window that faced east. When evening came, she sat on the porch with a glass of water and a book she didn't intend to finish. She watched the waves change color from blue to amber to a deep, aching gold. She watched a boy toss a frisbee to a barking lab. She watched a couple hold hands without saying a word. She watched the world exist, and for once, she didn't have to brace against it. That night, she lit a candle, pulled out a crisp sheet of cream stationery, and began to write. Dear Bernard, you once said that silence is where truth lives. I used to believe silence was where pain went to die. Maybe we were both right. I'm writing to you from a place I never thought I'd find again: freedom. Not the kind people talk about in speeches or paint on murals, but the real kind. The kind you taste in your tea when no one's tampered with it. The kind you feel when you open a window and no one's watching what you breathe in. I planted flowers today. That may not sound like much, but it was the first thing I've ever done that didn't have someone else's name on it. It wasn't for Zachary. It wasn't for Henry. It wasn't for the neighbors. It was for me. A man named Charlie lives next door. He has kind eyes and doesn't ask questions. That's my favorite kind of person these days. I don't know what comes next, and for the first time in my life, I'm not planning 5 steps ahead. I don't need to. I'm not in court. I'm not on a battlefield. I'm not trapped in someone else's game. I'm just here. I don't think I ever lived before this. I existed. I performed. I survived. But today I lived. I watched a sunrise that had no ulterior motive. I drank tea without checking the temperature twice. I laughed, Bernard. I actually laughed. And it wasn't the laugh of a woman winning. It was the laugh of a woman free. Thank you for seeing me when no one else did, for being the mirror when I almost forgot my own reflection. With warmth, Martha. She folded the letter gently, placed it in an envelope, and sealed it with a wax stamp she found in a thrift store down the street. She didn't expect a reply. That wasn't the point. The point was this life belonged to no one else now. Not even the waves could own it. And so she sat in her chair as the ocean whispered its lullaby through the night, and the flowers waited for morning. The story exploded like dry leaves in a blaze. News anchors, bloggers, and true crime channels devoured it. The headlines appeared within 48 hours of the arrest, first in local dailies, then in state bulletins, then national morning shows. The heir who never was. Mother betrayed the chilling case of a fake son and a fortune. Adopted, then deceived, the Martha Sullivan scandal. The footage was everywhere. Grainy black and white clips from the security feed Martha had salvaged, synced with hidden audio Bernard had authenticated. The image of Zachary mixing crushed pills into a teacup, Amber whispering into her phone about mental instability, Zachary pressing the door shut on Martha as she tried to follow them, the lawyer nervously looking away. Clips of the courtroom ran on repeat. Zachary, in a gray suit 2 sizes too big, standing stiff beside his attorney. Amber beside him in beige, her hair pulled tight, lips chewed raw. The camera captured everything, Zachary avoiding Martha's eyes, Amber dabbing her cheek when the sentence was read aloud. Zachary Sullivan, for crimes of elder fraud, unlawful confinement, and attempted coercion of estate documents. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in a state correctional facility. Amber Lee Sullivan, accessory to all charges, sentenced to 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. A still photo of Martha sitting silently in the gallery, unflinching hands in her lap. Pearls gleaming under courthouse lights was picked up by media outlets nationwide. They called her the widow who outsmarted them all. A podcast host referred to her as the most dangerous woman ever to pour tea. But Martha stayed silent. She didn't give interviews. She declined appearances. When a producer from a major streaming platform emailed her assistant with an offer for the rights to her story, she deleted it without replying. The world talked. Martha gardened. The only public statement came not from her but from Bernard. At the annual State Medical Ethics Conference, Bernard Stone was introduced not just as a guest of honor, but as an example of moral clarity under legal and psychological pressure. The moderator, an old friend from med school, recounted the moment he intervened. Bernard took the podium with the calm stillness of a man who had seen something and chosen to act. "I didn't save Martha Sullivan," he said. "She saved herself. I merely saw the truth she allowed me to see. The greatest crime in this case wasn't fraud or abuse. It was the assumption that a woman of age, of silence, of grace, would be too tired to fight back." The applause lasted minutes. He stepped down without taking questions. Somewhere far from the stage lights and microphones, a woman who once bore the title Mother sat by her porch with dirt under her fingernails and jasmine blooming on the rail. It was 2 weeks after the sentencing when the letter arrived. No return address, just her name scrawled in handwriting she hadn't seen in over a year. She recognized the jagged M. Inside the envelope was a single page. "Dear Mom, I don't deserve to call you that. I know that now. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know I remember. I remember the night you stayed awake beside me when I had the flu and thought I'd die. I remember the birthday you built a tree house with your own hands because I wanted to sleep under the stars. I remember you crying when I got accepted to college and pretending it was the onions you were cutting. I remember you loving me, and I'm sorry I let that memory rot into greed. I don't know who I am anymore, but I know who I lost. You. I hope the ocean gives you peace. I hope the jasmine blooms. I hope one day I can become the man you thought I could be. Zachary." She read it once, then again, then folded it slowly, pressing it flat on her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't sigh. She simply stood, walked into her kitchen, and lit a single match. Outside, the sea winds had begun to stir, sweeping through the porch like a restless ghost. She took the match to the letter and held it at the edge until the paper curled, blackened, then caught into full flame. She watched it devour line after line, the ink turning to smoke, the apology crumbling into ash. She let the wind take the remains. They fluttered off the porch rail, scattered over her flower pots, vanished into the sunset. She returned inside, poured herself a cup of tea, and watched the tide roll in. Some truths didn't need to be forgiven. They just needed to be let go. It began with small footsteps on crushed shells. Martha was kneeling in the garden behind her bungalow, hands sunk into dark soil, planting sweet basil between marigolds and rosemary. The ocean breeze carried a scent of jasmine and sea salt, and her knees were dusted with earth like a badge she wore with quiet pride. She didn't hear the child approach until the shadow reached the corner of the raised bed. "Is it alive?" She turned. A boy no more than 7 stood behind the gate, skinny with tangled hair and wide gray eyes that reminded her of smoke on still water. His sneakers were 2 sizes too large, his jeans torn at the knees. There was dirt under his fingernails, and hunger in his stare, not just for food, but for something older. Safer. Martha blinked. "The plant." He nodded. "Yes," she said, "but it's shy." He took a step closer. "Shy." Martha sat back on her heels, brushing off her gloves. "Some plants don't like to grow unless someone talks to them, unless someone tells them it's okay to belong here." The boy tilted his head. "How do you do that?" She reached into the soil, loosening a small shoot of mint, and patted the space beside her. "Want to try?" He hesitated, then crossed the garden bed and dropped beside her, his skinny knees drawn to his chest. Martha placed the mint in his palm. His fingers closed around it with reverence. She pointed to the empty space in front of them. "That's yours. You talk to it while you plant it." His voice was barely above a whisper. "Hi, I'm Mason." Martha smiled. "Tell it what you want," she said gently. The boy looked down at the sprig in his hand. "I want to be somewhere people stay, not somewhere they leave." The words hit her like a soft brick to the heart. Martha's hand hovered for a moment before she reached out and helped him dig the hole. Their fingers brushed her old thin ones, trembling slightly, his calloused from playground asphalt and forgotten chores. They planted the mint. "I think it'll stay," she said. "Plants like when they're wanted." The boy sat back, beaming in a way that made the garden feel warmer than the sun allowed. A few minutes later, the gate creaked again. Charlie stood there holding a tray with 3 cups and a plate of lemon shortbread. "Visitor?" he asked. Martha nodded. "This is Mason." Charlie crouched down to the boy's level. "You drink tea, Mason?" Mason shrugged. "Never tried." "Well," Charlie said, setting the tray on the old mosaic table beneath the olive tree, "you're about to have the best first cup in California." They sat together, a strange and gentle trio, an old widow with dirt-streaked palms, a barefoot boy with scars on his knees, and a retired jazz pianist who brewed tea like it was a religion. Mason devoured 2 cookies before saying another word. Charlie chuckled. "You eat like someone who doesn't expect seconds." Mason blinked. "At the shelter, seconds are for the lucky." Martha's chest tightened. Charlie poured more tea. She turned to Mason, watching him cradle the chipped mug in both hands. "You like stories?" she asked. Mason nodded. "Then let me tell you about a woman who used to think the world owed her nothing, who locked her heart in a house and forgot where she left the key." Mason leaned in. "But one day," she continued, "that woman found out something beautiful, that if you plant something with your hands and care for it, it grows, even if your hands used to be used for building fences instead of gardens." "Was it you?" he asked softly. Martha didn't answer. Instead, she plucked a sprig of rosemary and held it beneath his nose. "Tell me what that smells like." He sniffed, eyes fluttering shut. "Warm, like soup on rainy days." Charlie sipped his tea beside them, saying nothing, just listening, just being there. They stayed in the garden until the shadows grew long and the gulls flew low across the horizon. Mason talked about his favorite comic books, about how he'd never seen the ocean before last week, about how the volunteers at the shelter didn't know he was sneaking out after sunset just to walk past the houses and wonder what it felt like to have a porch light left on for you. "I leave mine on, Martha," said her voice barely a whisper. "For who?" he asked. She looked around the garden. "For the next seed that's brave enough to show up." The next afternoon Mason returned, and the afternoon after that. They painted old cans and turned them into planters. They fed the hummingbirds. They made lavender bundles and left them on neighbors' doorsteps anonymously. Mason began to laugh more, to linger, to stop looking over his shoulder. Charlie joined them now and then, always with something new, homemade cinnamon bark tea or an old harmonica Mason became obsessed with. Martha never asked where Mason went at night, never asked about his last name, never asked what he ran from. She had learned finally that survival was not about the stories we carried, but the spaces we offered for others to rest. One evening, as they watched the sun melt into the sea, Mason turned to her. "Miss Martha." "Yes. Are you happy now?" She thought for a moment. The waves rolled. The jasmine stirred behind her. Then she looked at Charlie, who gave her a soft smile over his teacup. She looked at Mason, who had dirt on his cheeks and leaves in his hair. And she said, "I think I might love life again." It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. But it was true. And in that garden beneath the whispering olive tree surrounded by mint and marigold, the world felt like it could begin again. The envelope arrived without fanfare. No embossed lettering, no velvet lining. Just a clean white paper with a seal Martha hadn't seen in over 25 years, the silver griffin of Grant Corporation stylized and bold in the upper left corner. The letter inside was short and to the point, precisely how Marcus Grant had always operated. "Martha, I haven't forgotten. You saved my life in more ways than one. We're honoring individuals who've shaped the ethical compass of this city, and frankly, none of them would have had the chance to if you hadn't taken a stand that day in court. Come to the gala, for you, not for legacy, not for ceremony, just for you. Marcus." She read it twice, then folded it neatly, set it by the small dish of sea glass on her writing table, and went back to repotting her sunflower. She wasn't sure she would go, not until the night before when she caught her reflection in the mirror. Hair-loose skin gently creased by years that had finally softened rather than haunted her, and said aloud to the silence, "I think it's time someone saw me standing tall again." The next evening, Martha arrived at the City Hall ballroom just as the sun dipped behind the high-rises, casting amber shadows across the sidewalk. She wore slate gray, not black, not mourning, a color like river stone. Her hair was swept into a soft bun, a single pearl clipped at her ear. No stylist, no entourage, no borrowed diamonds. The valet offered his arm, but she declined it, walking up the grand steps alone, heels echoing with calm precision. Inside, the space glittered. Crystal chandeliers swayed gently above a sea of black ties and silk gowns. Cameras flashed, waiters floated with trays of champagne and caviar. A string quartet played something Vivaldi-like in the background. She spotted Marcus near the dais. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still wearing that barely there smirk, like he knew the ending of every story before it started. He turned as if sensing her presence. Their eyes met. He crossed the room swiftly. "Martha Sullivan," he said, his voice a quiet mix of awe and affection. "I half expected you to ignore me again. You invited me as myself," she replied. "That's rare enough to honor." He offered his arm not as a guide, but as a gesture of welcome. "Walk with me." They slipped out onto the balcony, leaving behind murmurs and music. The city below shimmered. The noise felt far away here, muted by glass and height and memory. "You ever think about it?" Marcus asked. "That courtroom, that day." "All the time," she said. "But less for the verdict and more for the moment I realized truth didn't need to scream." He leaned against the railing. "You terrified that judge. You know that, right?" She chuckled. He needed terrifying. A pause. Then softly, "Do you regret it?" he asked. "The choices, the life." She looked past him toward the skyline. Her eyes held the weight of every decade, every silence, every betrayal, and every bloom. "I regret living for shadows," she said, "for people who only saw me as scaffolding." He didn't speak. He just nodded as though the admission itself carried enough gravity to shift stars. She added, "But I don't regret waking up." The gala behind them continued, but neither noticed. They returned inside only when the speeches began, when Marcus was called to the stage and handed the gold-etched award. He held the microphone lightly, then said, "There are people in this room with power, and there is one person in this room who taught me what principle actually means." He paused. "I stand here because of Martha Sullivan." Cameras turned. Applause erupted. Martha didn't flinch. She simply smiled a quiet, elegant acknowledgement. Not of praise, but of presence. She stayed for one drink, declined 3 interviews, and slipped out before dessert. Back on the coast, just past midnight, she walked barefoot along the sand. The moon was high, the ocean a mirror of silver silk. She stood at the edge of the surf, letting the tide kiss her toes. The breeze pulled strands of her hair loose, lifting them like threads of an old life unraveling gently. She closed her eyes. The world behind her faded. No mansion, no courtroom, no child calling her name. Just the sea, just the wind, just herself, alive, alone, whole. And when the sun rose hours later, the first light touched her face, and she did not look away. She welcomed it,